September 23, 1991 Observer Newsletter. The death of Chris Von Erich. Watts debut crusher by Observer staff. Wrestling Observer Newsletter. September 23, 1991. As most of you have probably heard by now, 21-year-old Chris Adkisson, better known as Chris Von Erich, the youngest son of former wrestler/promoter Fritz Von Erich, died from an apparent suicide on the evening of September 12 at his home in Tyler, Texas. Chris was the fourth son of Fritz Von Erich to die before reaching the age of 25. According to news reports, Chris had talked on the telephone earlier in the day to older brother Kevin and was very despondent. About 9 p.m., Kevin and mother Doris found Chris, who had been shot, about 150 yards from the family ranch with a 9mm pistol beside him. He was rushed to East Texas Medical Center in Tyler, where he passed away at 10:27 p.m. Investigators found a one-page handwritten suicide note, where Chris wrote that his family was not to blame for his suicide and that he was sorry. In the note, he wrote about his 3 older brothers who had died, but there was no indication their deaths were part of the reason he decided to take his own life. Fritz and Kevin Von Erich appeared on a Dallas television show Friday night, with Fritz giving the impression that Chris's suicide had to do with his inability to come to grips with the fact he wasn't going to make it big as a wrestler. The Von Erich family, which may still be the most famous wrestling family in the world, achieved incredible popularity in the mid-1980s when Father Fritz ran the world-class championship wrestling promotion, which had national syndication, drew enormous television ratings in the Middle East. Fritz built the company around his athletic, charismatic sons, Kevin, David, and Kerry. The group was just another regional office until late 1983, when the fabulous Freebirds, Michael Hayes, Terry Gordy, and Buddy Roberts, came to the area, and it became at one point the hottest promotion in the United States. In 1983, the group drew 3 sellout crowds of 17,500 at Reunion Arena and regularly sold out the Dallas Sportatorium on Friday nights. However, the kids were unable to live up to the all-American image that their father had manufactured for them. In 1984, while on a tour of Japan, David, considered the best wrestler in the family and who at one point in 1983 was promised the NWA World title, died at the age of 24. David's death was originally reported as enteritis and intestinal inflammation, but has been widely reported in later years as a cover-up for a drug overdose. It wasn't the first in a series of major tragedies for the family. The oldest son, Jack Jr., died at the age of 6 after he was electrocuted. David, who was named for Doris Adkisson's brother that passed away as a teenager from brain cancer, also had a baby daughter who died a crib death. A memorial wrestling card for David, held on May 6, 1984 in Texas Stadium, which saw brother Kerry win the NWA championship from Ric Flair, represented the business peak of the Von Erich empire as the show drew 32,123 fans and a $402,000 house, which was at the time the second largest live gate in pro wrestling history. But upon David's death, younger brother Mike, then 19, who had an amazing resemblance to David, was thrust into the spotlight much faster than he was either ready or deserved. Unlike his 3 older brothers, who also began wrestling as teenagers in 1976 to 77, Mike was not a great athlete. Kevin was a starting fullback at North Texas State University, but quit school after 1 year after suffering a few concussions in football, to become a wrestler. David, a year younger than Kevin, actually had already broken into wrestling. He received a basketball scholarship to North Texas State, but didn't make the team and broke into wrestling. Kerry set a Texas high school record in the discus and was ranked among the best prep discus throwers in the country. He received a track and football scholarship to the University of Houston, redshirted his freshman year in football but did well in the discus, including winning at the Texas Relays. But by the end of his freshman year, he was out of college and into wrestling. While promoter Fritz tried to promote Mike as being the best amateur athlete in the family, the truth was he was a special teams player at a small high school in football and didn't even make varsity in track. Mike wasn't physically equipped for wrestling. Yet just a few weeks before David's death, he went to a time-limit draw in a match against Flair, when he'd only been wrestling 2 months. Mike's wrestling career was seemingly forever on hold because of chronic shoulder injuries. But when he did wrestle, he was always put over, only doing 5 or 6 jobs his entire career. Mike contracted toxic shock syndrome late in 1985, one of the few record medical cases of a male contracting the disease, and nearly died. He managed to recover and 10 months later was put back in the ring. But by this time, he'd suffered brain damage from the 107-degree fever during his toxic shock bout and had lost much equilibrium and coordination. In April of 1987, Mike committed suicide, despondent because of a recent arrest and because of his inability to live up to be the wrestler he was being pushed as being. The 2 surviving brothers, Kerry and Kevin, have both been through their share of misfortune as well. Kerry's career was thought over after a 1986 motorcycle accident, the effects of which are thought to have resulted in a partial amputation of one of Kerry's feet. While Kerry made a wrestling comeback more than a year later, he was never the wrestling attraction who in 1984 was ranked on the same level as Flair and Hulk Hogan as a national superstar, although he is still a featured WWF performer. Kevin nearly died from apparent heart failure in the ring in 1987, needing mouth-to-mouth resuscitation from Tommy Rogers, but at 34, he's almost a wrestling non-entity. Chris had been around wrestling dressing rooms for as long as anyone could remember. When Fritz was running the company, it was considered a given that when Chris graduated high school, he, like his brothers before him, would be pushed like he was a superstar wrestler. While in junior high, he used to dress and try and look like his brother Kerry. But he also had the same out-of-the-ring problems that faced his brothers. He was even smaller than brother Mike, who himself wasn't physically equipped for a wrestling career. He also had chronic asthma, which kept him from participating in sports while growing up. But that didn't stop his father from setting the stage for him to get into the family business. One time, when the family appeared on a religious television show, Fritz bragged that Chris was the best amateur wrestler of the group, and that in all his years in amateur wrestling, only had lost one time, to a boy who was 7 years older than he was. But when he got out of school and wanted to start wrestling, Chris, at 5'5", 165, was kept out of the ring by Jerry Jarrett, who by the late 1980s had become business partners in the world-class office with Kevin and Kerry. Fritz had gotten out of the business a few months after Mike's death, finishing with the infamous fake heart attack angle on Christmas night of 1987. By this time, crowds had dropped, and while the Von Erichs maintained a small core of fans, they were no longer crossover stars locally or major national stars in wrestling. Jarrett, in fact, began phasing out Kevin and Kerry and wanted to build Dallas wrestling around his Tennessee wrestlers, particularly his own son Jeff. When Fritz got out of the business, he turned over control to Kevin and Kerry, who simply didn't possess the intelligence nor business aptitude to handle a company. The promotion wound up deep in debt and took in Jarrett as a partner to straighten things out. The end result was a messy split between Jarrett and the Von Erichs, which is tied up in litigation, but with the Von Erich company defunct. Just before the split up between Jarrett and the Von Erichs, Jarrett finally yielded and allowed Chris to wrestle in a few gimmick matches, mainly against Percy Pringle last year. Chris continued to work on independent shows in Texas after Kevin's world-class company went under. A few weeks back, while working on an independent show, Chris blew out his left arm. At the same time, his asthma had gotten worse, and he had to begin taking a medication that caused him to lose muscle tone. Police investigators believe the combination of the injury and medication caused him to become despondent because he was losing his physique, and he was unable to come to grips with the realization he just wasn't going to be able to make it in wrestling. Most of the major talk within wrestling concerns the angle at the WWF television tapings this past Monday night involving Roddy Piper, Ric Flair and Vince McMahon. We only had sketchy details in last week's issue for the scenario, which airs on September 28th on the Superstars of Wrestling show. Flair comes out and slaps Piper, who is then held back by Randy Savage, and there's a pull-apart type of melee. As the agents hold Flair back, Savage and McMahon try to stop Piper, since they've been setting this up on television the past few weeks with the story that if Piper were to get involved in any physical activity, he'd lose his job as an announcer. Flair broke free at least once and elbowed Piper again. Piper picked up a chair to retaliate, and on the backswing, accidentally hit McMahon, who wound up doing a stretcher job. As Piper hovered over the injured McMahon, Flair clocked Piper with a chair. There is scheduled to be a press conference on September 26th in Indianapolis to officially announce the Hoosier Dome as the site for WrestleMania 8 and put tickets on sale. The planned setup is for a 63,000-seat capacity for the show. The best guess from here is that the main event will be a climactic match between Flair and Hulk Hogan, probably with the belt versus belt scenario, although there is a long time and a lot can happen between now and late December, when the decision about which direction to go for WrestleMania would have to be finalized. In a related development, on Sunday on the Jim Ross radio show in Atlanta, Ross announced that Jim Herd had just been named the new president of the National Wrestling Alliance. That announcement probably meant nothing to the listening audience, but what it really meant was that at a meeting in Charlotte on Friday, World Championship Wrestling became the controlling power in the nebulous NWA. By virtue of it, Lex Luger was instilled as NWA champion. WCW will again become WCW, and use the NWA name as the sanctioning body, and the NWA name will be used on television once again. The NWA initials hadn't been used with WCW for the past several months, and in July, the NWA board voted to recognize Ric Flair as champion, rather than go along with WCW's decision to strip Flair of the title when he was fired. Apparently the NWA board, whose legal counsel was Dennis Guthrie, who is also Flair's attorney, had 7 members. The voting power, at least as far as the ability to control the NWA Championship, was in the hands of those who actually aren't even promoting wrestling these days. The 7-member board consisted of Jim Crockett, Gary Juster, Jim Herd, Larry O'Day, Australia, Steve Rickard Sr., Steve Rickard Jr., both based in New Zealand, who rarely promote wrestling these days, and 1 vote split between Carl and Elliot Murnick, ex-NWA promoters who were dumped by Herd. O'Day, apparently after being convinced by Jim Barnett of the WCW office, switched his allegiance to the WCW contingent of Crockett, Juster, and Herd, and the 4 votes were enough to make Herd the new NWA president, and also give WCW the power to control the NWA Championship. While this really means nothing, the real reason behind all this is a continuing battle over just who owns the NWA Championship belt, and perhaps a method of fighting back by WCW, which had been publicly embarrassed by Flair leaving the promotion with the championship belt and appearing on WWF television with it. It is somewhat unclear as to who actually owns the belt, as Flair claims ownership based on a contract settlement for money owed him by Jim Crockett when Crockett's debts overwhelmed him in 1988. WCW claimed ownership, believing that the belt was one of the things Turner Broadcasting purchased when it purchased Jim Crockett Promotions in 1988, and there was talk this past week that they were going to take steps to legally gain possession of the belt, this, apparently, being that step. What is clear is that Flair was going to have to be paid the value of the belt by WCW when it came time for him to lose it. However, as NWA champion, WCW didn't have the legal right to buy the belt back from Flair. I'm not clear if they even do now, but certainly it strengthens their legal claim. There is nothing new about the proposed wrestlers and referee union strike in Mexico City. The item was a major one in the Mexico City newspapers last week, but hasn't even been referred to in recent days. This much has been made pretty well final for the WWF Survivor Series pay-per-view show on November 22nd from Joe Louis Arena in Detroit. The headline match will be Hogan vs. The Undertaker for the WWF title. The rest of the pay-per-view show will consist of 4 different 8-man elimination tag team matches. The top 2 matches have been finalized, with Sid Justice and Big Boss Man and Legion of Doom versus Jake Roberts and IRS and Natural Disasters, and Piper and Bret Hart and Virgil and Davey Boy Smith versus Flair and Ted DiBiase and Warlord and the Mountie. While the most recent WWF magazine indicated there would be an Ultimate Survivor match, where all those not eliminated in the 4 matches would face off at the end, all of the 1990 show, the latest word I've got is the plan was scrapped. Last year's Ultimate Survivor match was anticlimactic on the show. Show your wrestling intuitiveness in a contest. The most talked about regular house show run-in years starts on October 25th, when the 2 biggest names in U.S. wrestling of the 1980s are scheduled to wrestle for the first time. There has been a lot of readers' comments regarding this series and this feud. Some think Flair vs. Hogan is the dream match fans have been waiting 10 years to see, and it'll be the biggest house show run in many years. Others think that the house show business is in such a weak state that the potential for a record house show run isn't there. Others have been skeptical over how much Flair will mean as a drawing card in the WWF. So it's time for a contest. It's time for readers to see just how much they know about what draws money to an arena, and what the state of the business is today. The first 2 Hogan-Flair matches are scheduled for October 25th at the Oakland Coliseum Arena and October 26th at the Los Angeles Sports Arena. The contest itself is simple. Pick the gate for the Oakland show and the Los Angeles show. The winner, as in the person who comes the closest to picking the actual gate in both buildings, will get a 1-year Observer subscription edition. Second place will get 3 months added to the subscription. Anyone reading this is eligible. One doesn't have to be a subscriber to be eligible for the contest. A few notes about the 2 buildings to help out. Ticket prices at the Coliseum Arena are $14, $12, and $9. The building holds 15,500 for wrestling. A sellout gate would be approximately $175,000, and the record gate for the building, which is right about that figure, was set for a match between Hulk Hogan and Kimala. Ticket prices at the sports arena are $18, $15, and $12. The building holds 16,000 for wrestling. While the sports arena has sold out many times for WWF events, it has yet to sell out since the new ticket prices were put into effect. The record gate for the building, which won't be touched by the October 26th show, was at WrestleMania with the high prices of $745,000. The WrestleMania 2 show at the Sports Arena in 1986 with high prices also did approximately $400,000, although neither of the 2 Mania Live shows actually drew a completely packed house. The regular event record is $193,000 for a match between Ultimate Warrior versus The Undertaker in the first show after Mania, which was about 1,000 tickets shy of a sellout. Depending upon which WWF official knows best, a full house at the sports arena would be somewhere between $206,000 and $220,000. I've had three figures quoted me in that range. Entries can be sent to the Observer through Saturday, September 28th. They can be sent via fax to our normal fax number, 408-378-6562, left on a phone message or sent in letter form. Phone and fax messages must be received by midnight Saturday night. Letters must be postmarked by Saturday. Winners will be listed in the Observer in the November 4th issue. There was a significant amount of national publicity this past week regarding the first collegiate start of Eric Watts, son of former wrestler/promoter Bill Watts. Watts, a fifth-year senior for the University of Louisville, was the starting quarterback for the Cardinals in a nationally televised game against Ohio State. Regular quarterback Jeff Brom broke his leg the previous Saturday. ESPN and several newspapers did features on Watts. ESPN aired some clips of Bill Watts as a wrestler, with the most repeated story coming about when Eric Watts was in second grade, how he brought Andre the Giant to school with him for show and tell. Watts passed for 303 yards, but also threw 3 interceptions and in a losing effort. Former wrestling headliner The Crusher, Reggie Lasowski, was hospitalized this past week after a heart attack on September 11th. Crusher required 6-way bypass surgery that lasted 7 hours. Crusher, 65, was one of the biggest drawing cards ever in the Midwest, holding both the USWA title and the tag team title on many occasions in a career which spanned from 1950 through the mid-1980s. Mexico. September 8th at El Toreo in Naucalpan, Sauconnec and Fishman and the Killer go to a double pin draw in the third fall against Dos Caras and Villano 3 and Owen Hart. Villano 3 had his mask removed in the third fall, while Hart and heel manager Andy Barrow both juiced during the match, which ended with Canek and Caras were both pinned simultaneously. In other results, Enrique Vera and Villano Cuatro and El Psicodelico beat El Engendro and Babyface and Negro Navarro in 2 of 3 falls via DQ when Engendro hit Vera with a low blow. Villano V and Fantasma beat Caballo Loco and Cajos. Katana and Solar and Fray Tormenta beat Falcon and Angel Mortal, and El Hijo del Diablo in the opener saw the Japanese trio of Akiyoshi and Takayama and El Samurai, Osamu Matsuda, beat La Migra and Cheyenne and Kennick. The final night of this run at Arena Mexico in Mexico City on September 8th was headlined by Jerry Estrada winning a hair versus hair match from La Fiera in a bloodbath when the match was stopped by the commission doctor since Fiera had a huge cut and was bleeding buckets. Canek and Caras had a non-title match on September 9th in Puebla. El Hijo del Solitario has been something of a flop as a face for EMLL, however El Hijo de Lismark is doing pretty well. According to the newspapers, in response to all the threats about strikes and everything, EMLL is threatening to now add a second weekly television show, taping a Saturday night card for rebroadcast later that night on CH9 in Mexico City in addition to the Sunday night show on CH2. Big Van Vader is headed to UWA in October, while Jushin Liger started for the UWA on Sunday in Cuernavaca. I believe Liger will wrestle Negro Casas this coming Sunday at El Toreo. Galavision EMLL card on September 13th at Arena Coliseo in Mexico City saw Oro and Plata beat Los Supremos in 1637 2.5 stars, Eddie Guerrero and Apollo Dantes and Angel Azteca beat Ponzoña and Espectro Jr. and Espectro de Ultra Tumba 1 star, Nitron and Fabuloso Blondie, Ken Timms, and Fuerza Guerrera beat Cacho Mendoza and Mano Negra and Hijo del Solitario 1 star, and the main event saw Estrada and Blue Panther and Satanico beat Sangre Chicana and Atlantis and Octagon in 2 straight falls. Panther made Atlantis submit in the first fall. Second fall saw Atlantis do a dive outside the ring, but it accidentally hit Chicana, who turned on Atlantis, and the faces were counted out, fighting each other. It appeared Chicana had turned heel to feud with Atlantis, but before it was over, Satanico attacked Chicana, and Chicana also attacked Octagon after injuring Atlantis in the post-match brawl. 1 star. Los Villanos kept their UWA Trios titles, beating La Ola Lila on September 10th in Pachuca, plus Samurai and Akiyoshi and Takayama beat Diablo and Scorpio Jr. via DQ. September 12th at Arena Pista Revolucion in Mexico City was headlined by Vera defending the UWA World Junior Heavyweight title against Killer. Kevin Von Erich was scheduled to headline a show on September 12th in Mexico City, teaming with Dandy and Blue Demon Jr. versus Chris Adams and Satanico and Mascara Año 2000, but obviously Kevin missed the date since that was the night Chris was found. Villano 3 has challenged Connect to a mask versus mask match which will take place at El Toreo over the next few weeks. These are two legends of Mexican wrestling, so this may be the main event of the UWA's biggest show of the year on October 20th, which is the 14th anniversary of the UWA. Expect Villano 3 to lose, since he's planning on retiring shortly. The Moscow Circus is running in Arena Mexico, so the EMLL has had to move its Friday and Sunday shows to the 5,500-seat Arena Coliseo. The magazines tried to explain the disappointing showing in their debuts last week of Adams and Von Erich to their first night in the high altitude, which does wonders for one's stamina if they aren't acclimated to it. Attila Jr. is coming to Mexico City for EMLL and challenged El Hijo del Solitario to a mask versus mask match because of a match in 1978 when El Solitario, El Hijo's father, beat Attila's father, the original Attila, in a mask versus mask match. New Japan. New Japan announced the lineup for its 16 round-robin tag team tournament which opens on October 5th and ends on October 17th in Fukuoka. The teams are Masa Chono and Bam Bam Bigelow, Tatsumi Fujinami, and Big Van Vader, Scott Norton, and Shinya Hashimoto, Keiji Muto and Hiroshi Hashi, Tiger Jeet Singh and Kim Duke, and the Samoans Kokina and Samu. What's interesting is the first four teams match up normal rivals. While Chono and Bigelow really have never had a feud, Fujinami and Vader have feuded for years. Norton and Hashimoto are tough guy rivals, and Muto and Hashi had some awesome singles and tag team matches in 1990. New Japan also announced its October 18th show in Hiroshima with Tony Halme vs. Vader, El Gigante and Jushin Liger vs. Bigelow and Norio Oniga and Fujinami and Hashi and Shiro Koshinaka vs. Muto and Chono and Hashimoto. The September 23rd New Japan show in Yokohama and October 13th show in Chiba both have $150 ringside tickets. The new tour before sellout 6,850 fans on September 10th in Osaka, with the headline match having IWGP champion Fujinami beating Hashi in 1928 via submission with a figure 4 leglock. Hashimoto pinned Koshinaka. The Great Muta, Keiji Muto, and Akira Nagami formed a ninja face-painted hill duo beating Duke and Masanobu Kurisu, Pegasus Kid, Chris Benoit, working without the mask but they are keeping him with the Pegasus Kid name, and Scott Norton beat Chono and Masa Saito. Brad Armstrong pinned Liger. Samoans beat Osamu Kido and Kengo Kimura. Brad Rheingans and Frank Anderson beat Obara and Black Cat and Oniga, and Hiro Saito and Super Strong Machine beat Kunyaki Kobayashi and Masashi Aoyagi and Kantaro Hoshino. September 14th in Anoto drew 1,870 as the Samoans and Norton beat Muto and Chono and Saito. Fujinami and Koshinaka beat Armstrong and Pegasus Kid. Nagami and Hashimoto beat Duke and Kurisu. Rheingans and Anderson beat Hashi and Yamamoto. September 15th in Hiroshima drew 1,400 as Samoans and Norton beat Fujinami and Kimura and Kido. Oniga and Hiro Saito and Tatsutoshi Goto and Machine won 2 out of 3 falls from Kobayashi and Nagami, and Kat and Hashi and Muto, Chono and Hashimoto each won prelim matches from rookies. September 12th in Tokushima drew 2,540 as Muto and Chono and Fujinami beat Samoans and Norton. Hashimoto and Hashi beat Duke and Kurisu. Nagami pinned Oniga in 16-13 to keep the IWGP World Junior Heavyweight title. Armstrong and Kid beat Machine and Hiro Saito, and Rheingans pinned Kat. September 11th in Okayama saw Muto and Chono and Hashimoto beat Norton and Machine and Goto. Fujinami and Koshinaka beat Duke and Kurisu by DQ. Samoans beat Kimura and Masa Saito. Nagami and Hashi beat Hiro Saito and Oniga. Anderson and Rheingans beat Kido and Yamamoto. Pegasus Kid pinned Kat and Armstrong pinned Obara. Riki Choshu is still out of action and no word on his return date, but he's, from the lineup, also going to be absent for the tag team tournament. Other Japan notes. Lots of independent shows since FMW is running regularly, building up to the show this coming Monday at the Kawasaki Baseball Stadium with Atsushi Onita vs. Tarzan Goto. Wing is running nightly and the Universal Lucha Libre group just ended its tour on Thursday night. Akira Maeda's latest rings card took place on September 14th in Sapporo before 4,900 fans, a few hundred shy of a sellout, as Maeda beat Willie Wilhelm, former European champion in judo, via submission in 10 o'clock. Dirk Leon Vrij beat Tom von Morik by submission. Willie Peters knocked out Bert Kops Jr. and others. All Japan Women ran a big show on September 7th at the Omiya Skate Center, headlined by WWA champion Bull Nakano against IWA champion Kyoko Inoue, who won the recent tournament to determine the #1 contender. Nakano won the match with, if you can believe it, a moonsault press at 2000 hours. This show was originally supposed to have Nakano vs. Asia Kong in a hair versus hair match, but Kong wasn't 100%, so they're holding off on that match. Also, Akira Hokuto kept her All-Pacific title, beating Yumiko Hata in 16-16. Toshio Yamada went to a 30-minute draw with Manami Toyota and Asia Kong, and Bison Kimura beat Suzuka Minami and Takako Inoue. This card was taped for home video. The last television show, which aired the August 18th tournament final on August 23rd, drew a 5.5 rating, which is the highest women's TV rating I believe of the year. All Japan women start their tag team tournament on October 4th at Korakuen Hall in Tokyo, which is the next major show. They'll be holding a 1-month-long round-robin with Nakano and Hokuto, Kong and Kimura, Kyoko Inoue and Yamada, Toyota and Etsuko Mita, Hara, and Bat Yoshinaga Minami, and Debbie Malenko, Takako Inoue and Mariko Yoshida and Mima Shimoda and Miori Kamiya. September 14th in Higashimurayama drew 2,350 as Minami pinned Toyota and Nakano and Hokuto, and Kyoko Inoue beat Kong and Kimura and Mika Takahashi. Takahashi announced her retirement after the September 8th card in Nagaoka. She teamed with Takako Inoue against her normal tag partners in the Jungle Jacks combination, Kong and Kimura, and did the job. While some expect her to work for Universal, since her longtime tag team partner Kaoru Maeda now works in the office for that group and wrestles while they have tours, she said after the show this was a real retirement, with her retirement ceremony at the October 4th Korakuen Hall card. Also on the September 8th show, Nakano and Hokuto and Kyoko Inoue beat Hara and Toyota and Yamada, and Minami pinned Bat Yoshinaga. September 11th in Ponoho saw Yamada and Toyota and Kyoko Inoue beat Nakano and Hokuto and Yoshinaga, Minami pinned Hara, Kong and Kimura beat Mita and Shimoda, and Takako Inoue and Yoshida beat Takahashi and Kamiya. September 15th in Airagi drew 2,100 as Takako Inoue beat Yoshinaga and Nakano and Hokuto, and Kyoko Inoue beat Yoshida and Yamada and Minami. Wing opened up on September 9th with the first television studio wrestling card in the history of Japan. The show was held at JCTV, Japan Cable Television, in the Roppongi area of Tokyo, with Mr. Pogo winning 3 television matches, the longest of which went 106. Also, the Headhunters tag team was split up, with one teaming with Tom Pritchard to beat the other teaming with Danny Davis, and they also did a time limit draw with Mexican women Zulima and Vicky Carranza teaming against Pantera Serena and Martha Villalobos. These 4 women are doing a tournament to determine a number 1 contender for the UWA Women's World title. The most interesting thing on the Wing Tour thus far is that they are recognizing Danny Davis as USWA Light Heavyweight Champion. In fact, on the USWA shows, they were promoting it was whomever the USWA Light Heavyweight Champ was would tour Japan. Davis then lost a non-title match to Masaru To on September 11th in Nagoya, which set up a title match on September 12th in Yokkaichi, where To beat Davis to win the title. The next night, Davis and To formed a tag team and lost to Eddie Gilbert and Pritchard. Obviously Davis will regain the title before going back home. Others touring for Wing include Eddie Gilbert, TNT and Gypsy Joe, El Gran Pistolero and USWA. September 13th in Matsuzaka drew 783 as Iceman and Mitsutaru Tokuda beat Gypsy Joe and Pogo, Gilbert and Pritchard beat Davis and To, Serena pinned Carranza and Villalobos beat Zulima. Yokkaichi drew 2,283 and was headlined by TNT and Pogo beating Tokuda and Shitori Saito. Universal drew a full house of 2,100 in a small building in Osaka on September 9th as Yoshihiro Osai beat Ray Richard. Black Power beat Monkey Magic Wakita in a mask versus hair match, so Wakita shaved his head. Kaoru Maeda beat Mariko Yoshida. Kendo and Lobo Rubio and Pantera 2 beat Jose Luis Feliciano and Shu El Guerrero, and Black Terry and Ninja Turtles and Gran Hamada beat El Bucanero and Ricky Boy and Felino and Canelo Casas and El Signo. September 10th at the Oda Ward Gym in Tokyo drew 2,250 as Turtles and Osai won an elimination tag match from Guerrero and Terry and Feliciano and Rubio and Casas. Kendo and Hamada and Wakita beat Signo and Power and Bucanero. Pantera Dos and Lasser and Robin Hood beat Richard and Ricky Boy and Feliciano. A women's 6-man had Maeda and Toshio Yamada and Kyoko Inoue over Yoshida and Takako Inoue and Mayumi Yamamoto. Series ended September 12th at Korakuen Hall before a sellout 2,100 as Hamada beat Power in a hair versus mask match, revealing him to be former WWF referee John Bonello. Osai and Pantera Dos beat Casas and Bucanero. Maeda beat Mika Takahashi. Laser beat Felino to keep the UWA World Lightweight title, and Kendo and Signo beat Richard and Wakita. After the last match, Osai said that he was staying with Universal. Rumors abounded that Osai would jump to either SWS or New Japan, but Osai said he would return with this group in November and team with Kendo to face Hamada and Pero Aguayo for the UWA World Tag Team titles. MMW drew 1,285 on September 13th in Hirata as the Titan and Horace Boulder and the Gladiator beat Riki Fuji and Samba Asako and Atsushi Onita in a street fight. Tarzan Goto beat Jimmy Backlund. Gregory Varicha beat Shooter. Among those working underneath for this tour are Reggie Bennett, plus Mexican wrestlers Amigo Ultra and Pandita continue to feud, this time mainly in mixed tag matches with a midget Ultraman and a midget Pandita. September 14th in Aomori drew 1,521 as Verichev and Onita beat Boulder and Gladiator in a street fight. Goto beat Asako. Lu Chi beat Backlund. September 15th in Omagari drew 1,308 as Titan and Gladiator and Boulder beat Onita and Verichev and Asako. Goto beat Shooter and Lu Chi beat Fuji. JWP drew 1,200 on September 9th in Matsumoto as Lady X, Peggy Lee Leather, and Mayumi Ozaki beat Rumi Kazama and Hoski, and main event saw Scorpion and Medusa Michelli and Dynamite Kaisei beat Mami Kitamura and Devil Masami and Itsuki Yamazaki. Global. The group's first major house show took place on September 15th in Marietta, Georgia before 750 fans. 634 paid, as Terry Leland kept his Georgia television title pinning Festus. Billy Black and Joel Deaton beat Rick and Sheik Donovan. The Maulers, Rip Morgan and Jack Victory, went to a double countout with the Renegade Warriors. Mark and Chris Youngblood. Scotty Anthony pinned Al Perez after hitting him with a chain. Lightning Kid regained the global light heavyweight title that he had lost 2 nights earlier in Dallas, from Chaz with his feet on the ropes. Stephen DeTruth, Steve Prozik, who does a heel commentary role on the local show on Atlanta CH. 69 had gone on television and said he could pin the Blue Blazer in less than 30 seconds, and if he couldn't, he'd relinquish his spot on the point-counterpoint segment in Atlanta he does with Scott Hudson. The Blue Blazer turned out to be a sports coat and DeTruth suplexed it. Even took a bump for it, etc. Craig Johnson was the special ref for this match and Hudson was the timekeeper. Johnson counted slow and eventually walked out of the ring, so DeTruth had to count the pin himself in 32 seconds, owing to Hudson. However, supposedly the opening bell never rang, so DeTruth is using that as an alibi to stay on the segment. The Blazers then won the Georgia Tag Team title, beating Brute Force. Handsome Stranger beat Steve Lawler via DQ due to interference of Anthony. Terry Gordy pinned Axis the Demolisher, Bill Eadie in 3 minutes. Bambi beat Lady X, Peggy Lee Leather, via DQ, so X kept her LPWA title. By the way, LPWA right now should be considered as a defunct organization, at least for the present. Steve Simpson and Chris Walker kept the GWF Tag Team titles, beating the California Connection, John Tatum and Rod Price, in a match where Price blew out his knee and he'll be out for a while, and the Patriot kept the GWF television title, pinning Stan Lane in the main event. Jim Cornette was announced as barred from the building. He was actually at home celebrating his birthday. Lane used a foreign object throughout, and at the finish, Georgia All-Star Commissioner Gordon Clement ran to ringside and grabbed the object from Lane, and while Lane argued with Clement, Patriot came up from behind him and schoolboyed him for the win. They'll return to Marietta on October 20th, headlined by Patriot vs. Lane with Cornette in the corner and Sam Kent, who hosts the Wrestling Block with Bonnie Blackstone on Channel 69 in Atlanta, in Patriot's corner. The promotion was said to be happy with the turnout since it was the first show, even though it was less than break-even money-wise. Black and Deaton are gone from this group. Earlier in the week they wanted more money, which was turned down, claiming they're now becoming genuine names in Japan. So they worked the second match on the show and got on the ring mic and complained about being in the second match and said they were going to show everyone why they should be in the main event, and then proceeded to do one hot move after another, Japanese style, on the Donovans. The match was totally one-sided, and it was supposed to be a 50-50 match with Deaton and Black going over. A few wrestlers were put on contract. I'm not sure the number, but I've had it confirmed that Patriot, Scotty Anthony and Walker were among the group. September 13th at the Dallas Sportatorium drew 930 for a 13-match show which saw them begin to write storylines. Gary Young beat Bill Irwin via DQ in the opener when the California Connection attacked Young and Irwin made the save for Young, beginning a face turn. The Renegade Warriors won a squash. The Maulers beat Terry Daniels and Action Jackson with victory using a Cactus Jack elbow drop off the ring apron onto Daniels. Chaz pinned Lightning Kid in a non-title match. Anthony pinned Perez after hitting him with a chain. Stephen Dane pinned Terry Garvin using trunks. Irwin and Tug Taylor beat Rick Guerin and Jackson. The California Connection then attacked Irwin after the match, and Taylor kept Guerin and Jackson from helping Irwin out, until Young and Jeff Gaylord made the save. Dane beat El Gran Coloso. Perez pinned Sweet Daddy Falcone. Chaz pinned Lightning Kid to win the GWF Light Heavyweight title. California Connection went to a time limit draw with Renegade Warriors. Garvin pinned Buster Blackheart and Maulers DDQ Young and Gaylord in a match which saw outside interference by California Connection. Then Renegade Warriors and Irwin made the face save. The September 20th lineup has Maulers and California Connection versus Young and Gaylord and Renegade Warriors with Irwin in the face corner and Skander Akbar in the heel corner. Anthony versus Young, Irwin versus Kenny the Striker, Simpson and Walker vs. the Dirty Davis Brothers. Lightning Kid vs. Chaz and Dane vs. the Rattlesnake. Jeff rates. Nothing new on the fall negotiations with ESPN, although most of the shows that have aired in the afternoon of late have been legends or repeat shows. A decision will be made between now and mid-October. GWF doesn't have a production budget that will allow them to take that many new episodes in such a short period of time without any compensation from ESPN, so a compromise needs to be worked out. ESPN should be happy with the show, since the ratings for the afternoon slot have doubled from an 0.6 in the final days of Jarrett's group on the station to a 1.2. USWA. The September 9th card at the Mid-South Coliseum in Memphis drew approximately 1,300 as Billy Joe Travis beat MC Slammer, Brickhouse Brown, Vicious Vicky beat Miss Texas via count out, Bull Payne, Rick Gantner beat Bill Dundee via DQ, Dutch Mantel DDQ Dragon Master. Real name Gary Rich, about 6'10", he had worked independents in Virginia as a bodyguard called the Intimidator, including a few stints managed by Jim Cornette. Jeff Jarrett and Robert Fuller beat the PYTs, Eric Fontaine and Randy Rhodes, via DQ in a match which saw Christopher Love spray something in Fuller's eyes and Jarrett have to go it alone most of the way until Fuller came in at the end. And after the match, which ended in a DQ for Love's interference, the PYTs beat up Ronnie Gossett, then Jimmy Valiant and Coco Ware beat Awesome Kong and the Bruiser, who I believe is the same wrestler who worked as Leatherface, Johnny Rotten from Virginia, and the main event saw Jerry Lawler and Tony Anthony beat Eric Embry and P.Y. Chuhai via DQ when Travis hit Anthony with a guitar. On television this past Saturday, Travis was out with his guitar and read a letter he claimed was written by Paula Abdul. Love come out and called Gossett the world's oldest living virgin. Love later knocked down TV announcer Michael St. John, who was doing the show by himself because Dave Brown had the weekend off. Love started doing the announcing himself until Eddie Marlin came out and the PYTs and Love attacked Marlin. Lawler then came out and did the announcing for a while until St. John came out to finish the show. They did an interview where Embry claimed he was in Texas looking for Tom Pritchard, who is in Japan right now. Lawler and Chuhai had an argument on television where Lawler said Chuhai was big, fat Phil Hickerson, and Chuhai said that Lawler wasn't really a king. Travis hit Lawler with a guitar but Lawler didn't sell it and Dundee, Bull Payne, PYTs, Anthony, Fuller and Jarrett all wound up brawling with each other and Dundee was whipping Samantha, Donna Shepard, with a belt. Mantell did an interview with a telephone and told his little Dutchsters to call if they've seen Stan Hansen. He then got a phone call which he thought was a Stan Hansen sighting, but instead it was Eddie Marlin calling. The September 16th show in Memphis had Slammer vs. Kong, Daddy-O vs. Travis, Ware vs. Reggie B. Fine, Dundee vs. Payne, Mantell vs. Dragon Master in a hair vs. mask match, Fuller and Jarrett and Gossett vs. PYTs and Love and Lawler and Anthony vs. Embry and Chuhai with a guitar on a pole in a lumberjack match. Puerto Rico. Some results from the past week. September 15th in Mocha, Puerto Rico saw the Heartbreakers, Frankie Lancaster and Wendell Cooley, go to a Raw against Invader No. 1, Jose Gonzalez, and Bronco No. 1, Hurricane Castillo Jr. went do a double countout with Miguelito Perez, Giant Warrior. Butch Masters beat Dick Murdoch via DQ. Super Medico No. 3 beat Dusty Wolf. Sasha beat Monster Ripper in a women's match. Fidel Sierra, David Cannell / Cuban Assassin / David Sierra beat Ray Gonzalez and Alex Porto beat Armando Salgado. September 14th in Caguas saw Heartbreakers draw with Invader No. 1 and Bronco No. 1. Warrior beat Joe Don Smith. Galan Mendoza beat Medico No. 3, Carlitos DDQ Sierra, Sasha and Perez beat Ripper and Castillo. Gonzalez pinned Wolf and Porto beat El Corsario. September 13th in Aoyo saw Heartbreakers beat Warrior and Bronco. Gonzalez beat Wolf via DQ, Castillo and Sierra beat Perez and Colon. Sasha beat Ripper. Murdoch double count out Invader No. 1. Mendoza drew Medico No. 3 and Porto beat Tito Carreon, not the wrestler from the 1960s. September 12th in Fajardo saw Colon beat Murdoch. Invader No. 1 and Perez beat Sierra and Castillo. Heartbreakers beat Warrior and Gonzalez via DQ. Medico No. 3 beat Wolf. Bronco beat Mendoza and Porto beat Maelo Huertas. Oregon. A couple of title changes. The Grappler and Don Harris won the Northwest Tag Team titles from Steve Dahl and Demolition Crush on September 1st in Seaside, while Dahl regained the Northwest title from Billy Jack Haynes on September 14th in Portland. September 7th in Portland saw Harris beat C.W. Bergstrom. An angle saw Haynes pretend to turn babyface and say he was going to give the title belt back to Dahl because he didn't win it fairly. But of course Haynes bashed the belt over Dahl's head. Dirty White Boy Bobby Blair and Grappler beat Jimmy Jack Funk and Mike Winter when Grappler used his loaded boot on Funk. The next match was Al Madrill vs. Bart Sawyer, and if Madrill won, then Sawyer would be his valet for a week, and if Sawyer won, then Madrill would have to bleach his hair blonde. After a ref bump, which actually missed, Madrill pulled out an object and Doug Masters held Sawyer, but Al's punch hit Masters instead. Sawyer then got the object, but the ref got up and saw it and DQ'd Sawyer. Haynes and Rip and Larry Oliver beat Mike Miller and Crush and Doll when Rip loaded his thumb and gave Miller a thumb to the throat, and the finale saw John Rambo beat Masters. September 14th drew just under 500 fans as Grappler and Don Harris beat Sawyer and Rambo when Grappler used his loaded boot on Rambo. Then came an angle where Grappler started tearing up the life-sized poster on Tom Peterson. Since most of you have never seen Portland wrestling tapes, Tom Peterson has been the sponsor of the television show since just before the beginning of time and has never been in an angle that entire time. Peterson then started shoving Grappler, and when it came time for Peterson to do his live commercial, he was so mad he said he was going to call the commission and Don Owen and try to get Grappler suspended. Madrill then wrestled Winter with Sawyer as Madrill's valet. Sawyer kept making fun of Madrill behind his back, and the finish saw him throw a glass of water into Madrill's face and Winter schoolboyed him. Doll then won the title from Haynes in a match where both Rip and Larry Oliver were put in a small cage at ringside. The two had a real good match, ending when ref Sandy Barr was bumped. Rip threw in a foreign object and Haynes used it on Doll, then put him in his full Nelson finisher. Before Barr got up, Miller came down and hit Haynes with a board and put Doll on top for the pin. Then Funk beat Masters and the Rip Oliver vs. Miller taped fist match went to a 5-minute double disqualification when everyone else on the card did run-ins. September 21st has Doll vs. Rip Oliver and Haynes and Larry Oliver vs. Miller and Crush. Here and there. Championship Wrestling Federation drew 200 on September 8th in Tampa with Big V, Vern Henderson, beating Southern champ Cody Wade in a non-title match. Ben Masters Peach State Wrestling drew 325 on September 1st in Cordell, Georgia with Mr. Atlanta Tony Zane, winning a battle royal to become the USA champion. However, Daddy O, Jimmy Powell, won a mask versus mask from Mr. Atlanta. The Blazers beat the PYTs, Fred Avery and Lou Fabiano, in a barbed wire match, and Paul Golden beat the Nightmare, Ted Allen, for the USA Junior Heavyweight title. October 6th has Mr. Atlanta defending against Junkyard Dog and Blazers vs. Night Stalker, Brian Clark, and Ronnie Gossett. Herb Abrams UWF has a television taping on October 1st at City Limits in Fort Lauderdale, Florida with Paul Orndorff, Junkyard Dog, the Black Hearts, Brian Blair and Danny Spivey all scheduled. Someone who writes the TV show Designing Women must be a wrestling fan, because when they wrote out the Delta Burke character from the show, in the story she left for Japan. By the way, when this story was told to me, we finally figured out why in the old days, all those wrestlers who were injured in the United States always wound up in Japan a few days later. It's because they have good doctors there. September 14th in Venice, Florida drew 375 as Rick Ryder and Tommy Wright beat the superstar, Bob Cook, and Robbie Idol with manager Abdullah Farouk Jr. in a match where everyone juiced. Boris Malenko show on September 15th in Tampa drew 150 as Phil Donovan beat the Viper in the main event. Golden Phoenix became the first UU champion, Maryland area, beating War Pig on September 14th in West Virginia. There was some age in the ring at the Pro Wrestling America show on September 14th in Virginia, Minnesota as the main event saw Ray Stevens, now 57, team with Ken Patera, 49, to beat the Punishers via count out, and Baron von Raschke, 49, beat the Shocker before 600 fans. The hearing in Florida to get the ball rolling on the bill to establish a wrestling commission has been pushed back to November 5th. The bill would mandate steroid testing of all wrestlers in Florida along with random drug testing, and there are things that will probably coming out of the hearing that will make significant news items regarding steroid use in pro wrestling. Gary Hart is running weekly shows in Mansfield, Texas, drawing about 60 fans. This past weekend on TV in Dallas he ran a few spots with clips featuring wrestlers who mainly work now for Global, like The Simpsons, Dragon Master and Terry Garvin, plus Abdullah the Butcher acting like they're all appearing on the shows. South Atlantic Pro Wrestling on September 11th in Charlotte, North Carolina saw Chris Chavez beat Manny Fernandez via DQ. Junkyard Dog double countout with Shaska Watley, Pez Watley, Tommy Angel and Tommy Seabolt beat German Stormtroopers via DQ, and Denny Brown pinned Trent Knight. September 12th in North Wilkesboro, North Carolina saw Chavez beat Fernandez via DQ when Watley interfered. Seabolt beat Hans, Dog double countout Watley, Nikki Hawks beat Gary Royal, and Brown beat Cruel Connection. September 14th in Bennettsville, South Carolina, drew 815 as Chavez beat Fernandez via DQ. Dog double count out Watley. Seabolt and Angel beat Stormtroopers via DQ. Jimmy Johnson beat Tyrone Knox. Brown beat Cruel Connection and Hawks beat Knight. Ladies Major League Wrestling on September 10th at City Limits in Fort Lauderdale, Florida included Penelope Paradise, Allison Royal, Debbie Malenko, Luna Vachon, Bambi and Malia Hasaka, among others. Crowd was 183, but only 60 paid. This group's old television tapings done in March of 1990 will air on Channel America on October 18th, November 15th, December 13th and December 27th from 11:30 p.m. Eastern Time will Bill Cardile and Bruno Sammartino doing the announcing. Shows will also air on CH 30 in Los Angeles, CH 62 in Boston, CH 34 in Atlanta, CH 27 in Seattle and CH 55 in Chicago. A September 14th lucha match in Long Beach with Bad Boy and Alfil Negro and Triton beating Superboy and Captain Oro and Principe Indu was rated a 4-star match by several and one of the best lucha matches in Southern California in years. The Aragon Ballroom in Chicago has a show on October 4th, and they've announced Mil Mascaras, Tinieblas, Carlitos Colon, Sergio El Hermoso and El Bello Greco as appearing. Pro Wrestling America has a free show at Treasure Island Bingo and Casino in Welch, Minnesota with Thunderblood Charlie Norris vs. Mean Matt Derringer, Lightning Kid vs. Jerry Lynn for GWF Light Heavyweight title, Baron Von Raschke vs. The Shocker, Derek Dukes vs. Tejo Khan, The Punishers vs. Tommy Ferreira and Rick Havoc for PWA Tag Team titles and JW Storm vs. Ravishing Ronnie. September 21st at the Ballplain Baseball Diamond has Punishers vs. Ferreira and Tony DiNucci, Ken Patera vs. Randy Gusto, Shocker vs. Von Raschke, Norris vs. Khan and Lynn vs. Kidd. September 8th at the Unicorn Ballroom in Houston saw Tiger Conway Jr. go to a double count out with Apache Bull Ramos to set up a match on September 20th in which Conway puts up his title and Ramos puts up his ponytail in a no DQ match. WCW has organized a steering committee as opposed to a booking committee. The committee is responsible for discussing with our Director of Wrestling Operations, Dusty Rhodes, the direction of an emphasis on the various WCW money streams and the priority placed on each one. So the committee, composed of Jim Crockett, Jim Ross, Rhodes, Terry Allen, Magnum TA, Jim Barnett and Jim Hurd is there to set long-term direction and emphasis and will have weekly meetings. One Man Gang's future is in limbo. On September 13th in Charleston, he refused to do a clean job for PN News, although he did it in a polite way as opposed to others who aren't so polite about things. He was told to go home for a few days and think things over, but the last word I've got is that he isn't expected back. Gang did work the match that night and they had him lose via DQ, but he was sent home after the show. Steve Austin suffered a dislocated kneecap on the same card and we have no word on how long he'll be out of action. Brian Pillman was still out of action as of the weekend, but should be back by the time you read this. The TV commercial, which I loved, by the way, for Galoob Toys with Paul E. dangerously about toys that are enough fun to make a grown man lie, had to be pulled because the commercial agent for Jason Hervey is suing WCW and Galoob because they didn't have Hervey or his agent's permission to use Hervey or his likeness in a commercial for the product. Among the clips that aired in the commercial was the one where Dangerously hit Hervey with a telephone. I believe that's the reason they started re-showing a Galoob doll commercial that includes Ric Flair, which at this point probably doesn't thrill those in the company. When Terry Taylor was in Hollywood, he read for a part in an ABC action series. No real message can be gained from quarter-hour breakdowns at the last Clash. The show opened with a 2.6, but quickly grew to a 3.1 and steadily improved, peaking with a contract signing angle with a 4.3 and the finale, Steiner and Kazmir vs. Anderson and Zbyszko, drew a 4.2. It was the lowest-rated main event in Clash history. WCW has a show at the Schurig Arena at San Jose State University in early November. The Young Pistols and Freebirds are back feuding again in October. The Pistols are taking the place of the Japanese force, Hiroshi Hazi and Kensuke Sasaki, whose tour was cancelled because Sasaki broke his leg. That would have been interesting had Hazi and Sasaki came, if only because I guess that meant they'd be programmed as faces. But certainly an unknown team with no build-up would be booed against the Birds, who are heels that fans often cheer. September 14th in Greensboro drew 1,400, with kids priced at $5, as Van Hammer pins and Panzer Brad Anderson. In a terrible match, Cactus Jack pinned Bobby Eaton clean with the double-arm DDT in a great match with lots of good outside-the-ring brawling. Tom Zenk and Dustin Rhodes and Big Josh kept the six-man titles beating Thomas Rich and Taylor and Richard Morton when Rhodes pinned Morton, Rick Steiner beat Diamond Stud via an over-the-top rope DQ in a good match. Arnold Anderson and Larry Zbyszko beat the Patriots. Sting went to a double disqualification with Abdullah the Butcher in a good outside-the-ring brawl, and Ron Simmons and Barry Windham beat Mr. Hughes and Lex Luger via DQ when Harley Race interfered in a good match. This was considered the best show in Greensboro when it came to effort of the wrestlers and overall work rate in several months. WCW also had good news when the September 7th WCW show did a 3.0 rating, which is its best rating thus far in 1991. Main Event the next day did a 2.4 while Power Hour did a 1.7. No word on who will replace Gang in the Chamber of Horrors match on the pay-per-view, but logic would say it should be Cactus Jack. Of course, that probably means it will be the Night Stalker, who they talked about as coming in on the radio show. WCW trying to open up relations with Mexico. September 15th in Bristol, Tennessee drew 800 as News beat Panzer 1 star. Rich pinned Mike Graham 3 stars. Patriots beat Freebirds via DQ dud. Luger pinned Windham in a great match, said to be the best Luger-Windham match thus far. After outside interference from Race 3 and 1/2 stars, Eaton pinned Rich dud. Rhodes and Zank beat Freebirds -1/2 of 1 star. This show was a basic disaster in the no-show department with 9 no-shows without any explanation or offer of refunds, and the crowd that was there was really upset. Those who weren't there were Pillman, Gang, The Web, who was supposed to be Brad Armstrong, who was booked for Japan months ago, Josh, Oz, Austin, Johnny B. Bad, Lady Blossom, and Stud. Van Hammer, who wasn't announced to the fans, was also scheduled but not there. Hammer, Oz, Bad and Stud were in the same car and got lost trying to find Bristol. Patriots have been booed in most cities against enforcers. Zbyszko gets booed a lot, but Anderson is being cheered almost everywhere. The Bad Street character is history, and when Armstrong returns from Japan, he'll wrestle as a masked man called either the Web or Arachnaman. Dusty Rhodes did an interview at the tapings on September 16th at Center Stage talking about the October 12th Omni show, where he'll be special ref for the tag team match, and made veiled references to Sid Vicious and Ric Flair, saying how justice will be served when he refs, and also made a reference to Flair. Oz and El Gigante will be taping an episode of Swamp Thing. WWF. Curt Hennig is now expected to be out of action for at least 1 year because of his back injuries. Don't expect any references to Mr. Perfect on television during his absence. Chris Von Erich missed last weekend's date because he was passing blood in his kidneys. He was expected to return for this past weekend's dates, but the death of his brother put that on hold. Kato Tom Boric is in the midst of a 30-day suspension for cheating on his drug test. I think he was looking at the Iron Sheik's answers over Sheik's shoulder. This reminds me of a friend in high school who used to cheat on tests by copying off the dumbest guy in the class, and when I asked him why, he said, "That way the teachers will never accuse him of cheating on the tests." As the story goes, they felt he was using fake urine. Primetime Wrestling did a 3.2 rating for the show that Flair made his debut on, which is a good number against NFL football, while All-American's rating wasn't calculated because it aired in different times in different markets due to tennis coverage. Sergeant Slaughter isn't scheduled to be back on the road until at least late November, so this will be a slow-faced turn. September 13th in Allentown, Pennsylvania drew 2,500 as Big Boss Man beat Mountie in a cage match. IRS pinned Tony Atlas, Jim Powers and Marty Jannetty beat Pat Tanaka and Colonel Mustafa. Jimmy Snuka pinned the Barbarian, Coco Ware pinned Brooklyn Brawler, and Jim Duggan pinned Typhoon. Jannetty has been teaming with Powers as the Rockers of late because the original replacement, Shane Douglas, injured his ankle several weeks back. No word yet on when Shawn Michaels will return. September 14th in Denver drew 5,700 as Berserker pinned Hercules. Subbing for Von Erich in a really bad match. Beverly Brothers beat Bushwhackers. Ted DiBiase beat Virgil via count out in the best match on the show. Legion of Doom beat Nasty Boys when Hawk pinned Sags. Dragon pinned Skinner in 1646. Skinner isn't getting over anywhere. Bret Hart pinned Warlord. Hart carried it to as good a match as you can expect with Warlord, and Sid Justice beat The Undertaker in a coffin match with mainly chokes that wasn't a good match, but the crowd got into the chokes. Justice dedicated the match to a local guy who was dying, and after the match said, "This one's for you, Lou." I think the guy's name was Lou, which confused the crowd, but Lou knew. Wayne Bloom spent Friday night in jail on a disorderly conduct charge after a card in Milwaukee but didn't miss any shows. September 15th in Frederick, Maryland saw Snuka beat Barbarian. Bob Bradley and Brawler beat Barry Hardy and Dwayne Gill. Duggan pinned Typhoon. IRS pinned Neidhart. Jannetty and Powers beat Tanaka and Mustafa, and Bossman beat Mountie in a cage match. September 13th in Milwaukee drew 5,000 as Berserker pinned Hercules. Beverly Brothers beat Bushwhackers, DiBiase beat Virgil via countout, Legion of Doom beat Nasty Boys, Dragon pinned Skinner, Hart pinned Warlord, and Justice beat Undertaker in a casket match. According to those who have talked with Ultimate Warrior, Warrior is telling people he's retired from wrestling. As his version of the story goes, he made the demands to work weekends only, and after SummerSlam was turned down and told he was suspended for 90 days, and at that time there would be a reevaluation, but at that point he supposedly quit. But it's not like there's a law against somebody changing their mind, either. Warrior could probably earn a healthy six-figure amount just off residuals from his merchandising for at least a year or two even without wrestling for a group. September 8th in Augusta, Maine. Drew 2001 as Typhoon pinned Greg Valentine, IRS pinned Neidhart, Jannetty and Powers beat Tanaka and Mustafa, Big Bully Bizic pinned Ware, Snuka pinned Barbarian, and Bossman beat Mountie in a cage match. The readers' pages. Dan Wolf of 2 to 5 Exton Road Apartments, Summers Point, New Jersey is starting a fan club for the Pit Bulldogs Rex and Spike. Brian Alston of PSC Box 984, Tyndall, AFB, Florida 32403 is looking for 1985-86 Saturday Night Main Events and the SNM Meet from April 1991 and the WWF/All Japan Show from 1990. Scott Decker of P.O. Box 5600, Hamden, Connecticut 06518 wants those he's trading tapes with to know that he's starting wrestling school, so the tapes he owes will take a little longer, but they'll get there. Windy City Wrestling is putting on a fundraising dinner on October 6th at John's Restaurant in Calumet City, Illinois. For more information, call 312-978-7317. Rob Feinstein of 865 Green Ridge Circle, Langhorne, Pennsylvania 19053 has a tape list which includes the Cactus Jack vs. Eddie Gilbert matches. Former wrestling star Ray Thunder Stern of 4553 Keller Springs Road, Dallas, Texas 75248 is looking for any old tapes, photos, articles, programs, films, clippings, or anything else that involved his pro wrestling career. Floyd Perry Jr. of 6408 Morgan, PL. Number 218, Stockton, California 95219 is looking for a source who can provide him with tapes from Japan, Portland, old Bill Watts Mid-South and UWF shows, old WWF shows on TBS, old Jim Crockett TV shows from 1981-87, and in return he can trade current Galavision Lucha Libre shows and WCW pay-per-view shows since 1989. Craig Napper of 789 Sackville Road, The Benzer 2756, New South Wales, Australia is looking for a tape of the August 9th SWS card in Yokohama and a source to get weekly copies of Gong magazine. Judy Martin of P.O. Box 6643, Columbia, South Carolina 29260 is opening up a pro wrestling school for women only. Danny Bagliore of 2722 East 26th Street, Brooklyn, New York 11235 wants to hear from anyone who has wrestling video lists. Clash. The Clash can be summed up in 2 words: Cactus Jack. Even though he had about 7 minutes of airtime, he stole the show, but 7 minutes of Cactus Jack isn't enough for a 2.5-hour show. Jack and the press conference were the highlight of the show. In other words, the angles were tons better than the wrestling. Pillman vs. Bradstreet was the best match. It's hard to pick a worse match because not much of it was good. The most disappointing would have been the Georgia Brawl. Nobody did anything, the finish was messed up. Van Hammer was worse than Kevin Nash. What did Terry Taylor do to deserve this? Richard Skinner. Greensboro, North Carolina. Was Fall Brawl a stinker or what? I've never seen so many wrestlers so visibly vault themselves over the top rope in order to compensate for a flubbed move. Pillman, Bradstreet, Cactus Jack, and a well-realized plug for Luger vs. Simmons were the only bright spots to be seen. And for this I missed Pee Wee's comeback on the MTV Video Music Awards. Damn. Stephen Prozik. Atlanta, Georgia. Thumbs up. I think Johnny B. Bad plays his role as well as anyone in wrestling today, even though we don't actually know if he's a heel or a face. Some incredible stuff in Pillman vs. Bradstreet. More matches like this would be a great way to get over the light heavyweights, but then they blew it with the boring Morton vs. Graham match. Why wasn't Robert Gibson kept around for this match? Although there are too many titles and too many title belts, it was inexcusable for Sting not to come to the ring wearing his U.S. belt. Luger's new world belt pales by comparison to Flair's, and it looks like any other WCW belt. Good to see Cactus Jack get a well-deserved push. His performance was phenomenal. All in all, another glimmer of hope that hopefully WCW will build on this time. Jeff Singer. Woodstock, Ontario. Ding dong, Clash is dead. Came crashing down on Jim Herd's head. Ding dong, the once great Clash is dead. I did a lot of flipping to the MTV Music Awards during the Clash, and I hate MTV. Bill Strong. Bristol, Connecticut. Van Hammer looks like he's going to be a muscular PN News. George Reed. Springfield, Illinois. Who did Eric Bischoff's hair? Earl Scheib. Anyone else thinking if he wins this I'll never watch a Dusty book the WCW again when Dustin was among the last four in the Battle Royal? Just like Sting not to sell the knee in the abs. Johnny Between. Sting's gift, a cactus jack in a box. Reinstated Pillman reportedly given a bye in the tournament. Imagine the uproar he would have caused if, when asked who was behind sending Sting the gifts, Cactus replied, "The boss. The York Foundation gimmick sure has gone flat. When is Vince gonna call Scott Hall and Van Hammer? Clotheslines, shakes the ropes, where have I seen that before? Super job on the Ron Simmons build-up. Ron's dramatic ability is very underrated. Dusty at the signing table. I can already see him giving Race a bionic elbow at Havoc. Overall, a solid thumbs up. Mostly competitive matches, enthusiastic house, first-rate graphics and most importantly, piqued interest in the pay-per-view without overkill. Ernie Santilli. Drexel Hill, Pennsylvania. Thumbs down on the Fall Brawl. The show had its moments, but it was also very predictable. I was willing to give the show the benefit of the doubt until the Ric Flair wannabe Lex Luger made the racial slur at Ron Simmons. There's nothing like using a racial slur to build cheap heat. Even if I bought this angle, all I have to do is remember the last two PPVs. The feeling of being ripped off with gimmick matches that didn't deliver what they advertised and matches with screw job finishes. As long as Jim Hurt and Dusty Rhodes are running the show, I have to consider that before ordering pay-per-view events. I'd rather not throw $19.95 down the toilet when I can be more entertained watching the NFL on ESPN. Francis DeLauretis. Shoemakersville, Pennsylvania. WCW. In October of 1983, I, along with more than 10,000 others, nearly filled the Cow Palace in San Francisco for an AWA card headlined by a Battle Royal. This was a tremendous achievement for promoters Vern Gagne and Leo Nomelini. The AWA was starting to draw good crowds in San Francisco, a market which had been left for dead a few years earlier. The promotion was packing arenas in many cities around the country at this time, and was at its zenith. A mere 3 years later, I attended an AWA card at the Kaiser Convention Center in Oakland. There were maybe 1,000 fans in the building. All the names that had meant so much to the AWA like Hulk Hogan, Jesse Ventura, Ken Patera, Jim Brunzell, Rick Martel, the Road Warriors, Mr. Saito, the Freebirds and even the Crusher and Mad Dog Vachon had all left. The promotion was dying and it seemed that nobody in the organization had a clue how to save it. This experience and a feeling of déjà vu went through my mind this past Saturday night. I sat in the same auditorium. This time there were only about 600 fans there, as World Championship Wrestling held its most recent show in the Bay Area. I attended the card alone. Two of my best friends, who were longtime hardcore NWA fans, refused to attend the show. As happened with the AWA, virtually every wrestler I cared about in the organization has left: Terry Funk, the Great Muta, Ricky Steamboat, Eddie Gilbert, Tully Blanchard, the Road Warriors, Jim Cornette, and Ric Flair. There are a few interesting wrestlers to watch: Bobby Eaton, Terry Taylor, Arnold Anderson, and Barry Windham. But one wonders how long they'll be around. The parallels between the AWA of a few years back and WCW today are frightening. Both promotions were crippled by the same thing. Horrible booking, poorly produced television shows, a track record of no shows and screw job finishes at the arenas, and a severe drain of top talent with no adequate replacements. Today the AWA is dead. WCW is following it to the graveyard. There are, however, critical differences in the way each of these promotions declined. The differences make WCW's sorry state of affairs all the more inexcusable. In retrospect, one has to feel sorry for Vern Gagne for the failure of the AWA. He had successfully promoted for decades. Then suddenly all the rules of promoting wrestling changed radically. He faced a full frontal attack from a rival wrestling company, one that rated his talent, went head-to-head with him in his best cities, stole his television time, etc. Vern was from a different era of promoting and was simply unable to muster the know-how and financial resources to compete in this new environment. He tried. Maybe he should have left the company to someone else, but it was his company. WCW has no such excuses. The wrestling environment as it exists today has now been a way of life for years. When TBS got into the business, they knew they had to compete or they wouldn't make it. Yet, they chose not to compete. Even worse, TBS refused to put the entire promotional might of the Turner organization behind WCW. Equally as bad, the same management that has ruined the company is still running the company. Vince McMahon took Hulk Hogan from Vern Gagne. Jim Herd gave Ric Flair to Vince McMahon. Here is my solution to fix WCW. It is radical, but something radical needs to be done. 1. Fire the current management. We all know the two people who have to be replaced. 2. Immediately cease all activities, including television tapings, until December 1st. Cancel all house shows until February. 3. Bring in Bill Watts to take complete control of the organization. 4. Have Ted Turner and Bill Watts do an interview on the last new television show, apologizing for the current state of affairs and promise that on December 1st, you will see a completely new organization and a new product. 5. Until December 1st, make all WCW television shows highlight shows airing great matches from 1983 to the present. Have Jim Ross do lead-ins and lead-outs, continually emphasizing how excited he is about all the things that are happening and that he can't wait for the first week in December when things get unveiled. 6. Raid the WWF of talent, get rid of useless talent. Basically put together a new crew from scratch and put together long-term wrestling angles. 7. In December, introduce the new crew. Have 2 months of television to develop a storyline and angles before even starting to promote house shows. Then slowly expand the promotion with a 2 or 3 year plan. Without a drastic solution, WCW is headed for the same destination as the USWA. Let's hope that doesn't happen. John Koresh. Foster City, California. I attended the Great American Bash at the Omni on August 25th and would give the show a B. Nikita Koloff was the only no-show. Richard Morton took his place in the U.S. tournament and took on Dustin Rhodes. This was one of the best matches on the card with both men juicing. Bill Kazmaier and Rick Steiner beat the Hardliners in what was advertised as being a tornado match but turned out to be just another tag team match. Steiner worked most of the match as Kazmaier had no clue as to what was going on. Johnny B. Bad got a great crowd reaction with most of the fans cheering. One-man gang lost to El Gigante in what was supposed to be a hair versus loser leave town match. 5 or 6 wrestlers held gang while Gigante only took a little bit of hair off the sides. Gigante is even worse at cutting hair than he is at wrestling. In regards to SummerSlam, I'd give it a thumbs down. This show cost $30 and it was nothing more than another television show. Greg Berryhill. Cochran, Georgia. I don't like to write nasty letters, but I was so angry I had to make an exception. I turned in the WCW show on Pix this past Saturday to hear Jim Ross and Paul E. dangerously spend half the show knocking Ric Flair. While they never mentioned him by name, they kept alluding to this someone who claims to be the real heavyweight champion. What disturbs me so much is the same thing goes on all the time in private industry. When someone leaves a job, instead of management thanking the person for past contributions and hard work and wishing them well, they instead resort to cheap shots. WCW has made a lot of money due to Ric Flair. Because they blew the deal that would have kept Flair, they resorted to cheap shots. I certainly have lost a lot of respect for Ross, who I always felt he had some degree of integrity. I was privileged to meet Flair at John Arezzi's wrestling convention and found him to be a true gentleman. It's time for Jim Herd to pick up the pieces of WCW and for the company to go on. The fans all know who the real champion is. Linda Smith. Astoria, New York. I have some comments about Ric Flair. I am in the minority since I don't think the loss of Flair is the end of WCW. WCW had to break with the past at some point and begin promoting younger talent. This is not to be taken as an endorsement of Jim Herd and Virgil Runnels, because they both should have been fired by now. The upcoming Flair-Hogan matches don't excite me. Although McMahon has acknowledged Flair as a man who claims to be the real world champion, he has never mentioned the organization he was champion of. It's illogical to think McMahon will allow the immoral Hulk Hogan lose the title to the first person he's ever admitted worked for another federation. The idea of Flair having to end his career doing a job for Hogan is more contemptible than what WCW did with him. But it could be worse. Can you imagine Flair winning the WWF title and then having to drop it to Sid Justice? That would be the ultimate travesty. A lot has been written of the respect Flair will get from McMahon. If past history means anything, it will be short-lived. Harley Race was dressed up in a ridiculous King outfit. Dusty Rhodes was dressed up in a stupid polka dot outfit and had to dance with Sapphire. Ricky Steamboat wears a dragon outfit and breathes fire. Robert Lenhart. Middle Village, New York. Steroids. It's been commented that the steroid body in wrestling has to stay because it would be too hard to get the public to buy anything else. I don't think this is the case. Look at the movies. Hand-to-hand action films are almost always martial arts oriented. The biggest action heroes right now are Van Damme, Makepeace, and Siegel. None of these box office heroes are steroid freaks, but the public accepts their movies where they constantly beat up steroid freaks. Look at the action heroes that have failed at the box office. Lundgren, Bosworth, and I project inevitably Hogan. Schwarzenegger is the exception, not the rule. And in Terminator 2, people accepted the smaller Schwarzenegger as more lethal because he was presented that way. The acceptance of the smaller, more skilled fighter has already had the way paved by the movies. The acceptance of Lightning Kid by the GWF audience proves that smaller wrestlers will be accepted if they're skilled enough. Rich Davis, Riverside, California. Don't ever let up on the steroid story. It's too important a story. I just wish you'd go mainstream with it. There has to be a publication or a TV medium that would listen. It could help save some lives, or at least add some years to some lives. Eric Kroll, Orland Hills, Illinois. Jim Ross. I have a lot of respect for Jim Ross as a broadcaster. His commentary is insightful and entertaining, and his knowledge of wrestling history is always informative. He can, however, be annoying at times. Ross has long had a habit of putting down the WWF during his telecasts, frequently praising the ability of WCW wrestlers by saying, "They're out here wrestling, not posing to rock and roll music." This was obviously in reference to Hulk Hogan. Of course, at the time he was saying that, the NWA was putting on outstanding matches like Ric Flair vs. Ricky Steamboat and Ric Flair vs. Terry Funk, so he was justified. Ross had lightened up on the WWF in recent years, but this past weekend on WCW Main Event during a tag team match with Robert Gibson and Dustin Rhodes vs. Diamond Stud and Steve Austin, Ross remarked, "This is what wrestling is all about, not ripping off your t-shirt and posing." I'm really tired of Ross' anti-WWF attitude. Sure, Hulk Hogan is no Lou Thez, but he's still 10 times better than Oz, PN News, or Johnny B. Bad. If WCW is so down on the WWF style, why do they try so hard to copy it? To the point they've sent their own federation down the toilet in the process. Ross claimed that the NWA brand of wrestling was superior to the WWF may have been true at one time, but can he say that about today's WCW? Also, I failed to see the need for Paul E. Dangerously's childish comments about his daddy buying him a belt and saying, "I have a belt now, so that makes me a champion." Ooh. This is an obvious reference to Ric Flair. Ross has also recently taken to calling Lex Luger the undisputed world heavyweight champion in order to try and save some face. This is obviously just a case of sour grapes on WCW's part. All of a sudden they are so down on Flair because he's made the company look like a bunch of fools by going to the WWF. But they were doing a good enough job of that on their own. When I first started watching wrestling, it was the WWF I started with because I had seen Hulk Hogan on the A-Team. I didn't find out about the other federations until I started buying wrestling magazines. So if it wasn't for Hulk Hogan, I wouldn't even be watching WCW telecasts today and wouldn't be able to listen to Jim Ross put them down. Danny D'Angelo, DeLand, Florida. Morales. I really enjoyed the August 5th Observer, where you selected the best so far for 1991. I must comment on your choice for best television announcer. The clear-cut best announcer has to be Dr. Alfonso Morales. I think I enjoy his announcing as much as I like the action in and around the ring. He speaks in a poetic/philosophical manner that has no equal. I've tried to translate his words to my friends in English, but something always gets lost. By the way, my native language is Spanish and I'm a bilingual Spanish/English elementary school teacher. I enjoyed hearing the announcement on the September 1st Lucha Libre television show that promoter Paco Alonso not only attended SummerSlam, but apparently an agreement was signed between the WWF and EMLL for an exchange of talent. Maybe Alonso wants to bring Ric Flair into Mexico. But I hope this agreement means more wrestlers from Mexico come to the WWF. It was my assumption that the Titan agreement with SWS would bring some Japanese wrestlers to the States. But I was wrong. But then again, with steroids going out of style, maybe Vince will want to bring in some genuine wrestling talent. Maybe someday those with the biggest pushes will be those who can do the best in the ring, and not those with the most muscle mass. Federico Garcia. Hawthorne, California. Coraluzzo. With all of the negative comments being made, I'd like to make some positive comments about a local independent that usually doesn't get much publicity. I attended Dennis Coraluzzo's show with Terry Funk vs. Bob Backlund and I was very impressed and got a lot of enjoyment out of the card. Being a fan of wrestling from all over the world for quite a while, I don't go to independent shows to see 5-star matches. What I do want to see is a show that runs smoothly without lots of delays and intermissions and wrestlers trying their best even though they may not be among the top workers in the world. Most importantly, I want to go home with a good taste in my mouth. Corluzzo came through with all of the above. The show proved you don't have to run nothing but gimmick matches like a barbed wire chain match in a cage where the loser has to go out on a stretcher and then gets his head shaved to please fans. You also don't have to burn the crowd out before your main event. And it's nice to see the guys wrestle in the ring for most of the show as opposed to them brawling all over the building where you can't see them most of the time. As best I can tell, most of the crowd went home happy. Gimmick matches are fine, but they are best appreciated when used in moderation. The same applies to brawling all over the building and to juice. Gary Zimak, Mount Holly, New Jersey. Crush Gals. I took offense to some insinuations made in the yearbook about butch Japanese women wrestlers. The Crush Gals were the finest technical wrestlers in the world during their career. Their physical beauty, or lack thereof, should not be considered a serious issue. Frank Strom. Revere, Massachusetts. Jim Herd. Here's the deal with Jim Herd. He's sick and tired of coming up second best to Titan Sports in every category, so he's making a serious run for the only #1 ranking that is still within his reach. If he keeps coming up with more lines like that Whopper and Matwatch, he may reach the top. The top in the balloting for most obnoxious in the 1991 poll. He's a strong contender with his hunchbacks and steroids/whiskey analogy, the decision to give the strap to Lex Luger while the business is plagued with steroid problems and is looking the other way at multiple no-shows at house shows with no announcements made to the paying fans and changes in advertised stipulations. If he keeps up this blistering pace, he may overtake Vince McMahon and Hulk Hogan by the end of the year, which would be quite a feat this year. I'd be remiss in not saying something about Joel Goodhart's August 3rd card with the Eddie Gilbert vs. Cactus Jack matches. If the second of their 3 matches was the single best match of 1991, I can be proud to have seen it live. The first one was an easy 4 3/4 star match. You can knock Joel Goodhart for the excessive amount of blood matches, which is valid, but he puts together matches like those that will be remembered for a long time. Perhaps if there were more wrestlers in the business like Eddie Gilbert and Cactus Jack, the business in this country wouldn't be in this sorry state of affairs. Thanks, guys. Paul Hanlon. Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Tickets to big shows. How can one get good tickets for the big out-of-state shows? I'd like to travel a big show, but I want to make sure I can get good seats. Daniel Brown. North Hollywood, California. Response from Dave Meltzer: the best way to go about it is to find out the date and arena well ahead of time before tickets go on sale, and then to find out when tickets go on sale. Some arenas will allow you to advance order, but generally the best way is to find someone in the local city and have them purchase tickets the day they go on sale. September 23, 1991 Observer Newsletter. The death of Chris Von Erich. Watts debut crusher by Observer staff. Wrestling Observer Newsletter. September 23, 1991. As most of you have probably heard by now, 21-year-old Chris Adkisson, better known as Chris Von Erich, the youngest son of former wrestler/promoter Fritz Von Erich, died from an apparent suicide on the evening of September 12 at his home in Tyler, Texas. Chris was the 4th son of Fritz Von Erich to die before reaching the age of 25. According to news reports, Chris had talked on the telephone earlier in the day to older brother Kevin and was very despondent. About 9 p.m., Kevin and mother Doris found Chris, who had been shot, about 150 yards from the family ranch with a 9mm pistol beside him. He was rushed to East Texas Medical Center in Tyler, where he passed away at 10:27 p.m. Investigators found a